I used to do lots of things.
I used to do things and I'd say things and Jesus I was evil. Take things and break things and Jesus I was evil. I never should be.
Welcome everyone to episode 25 of the Reckless Musecast. That's quarter of 100. If my math is good.
It's on.
Yeah, it's good. Cool. All right, good. Yeah. I wish you guys were here to give me that high five, but it's to celebrate my math. But yeah, well. Anyway, we got a special guest on the show, Philippe Gosselin. Thank you so much for coming on the show, man. So you're a filmmaker and you're also working on some pretty cool projects right now.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, can you tell us a little bit about Newtown? That sounds like a pretty interesting thing that you're working on.
Well, that's quite the rabbit hole. So if you guys want to start there, I'm all up for it.
Yeah.
So the sort of the elevator pitch of Newtown is quite simple. It's a cultural certification that allows free-thinking artists to bridge themselves to an heterodox consumer base, right? So there's millions of consumers out there who are looking for culture that's free of woke, right? And Newtown sort of makes it easy for them because it's a symbol, right? It's one thing, right?
Yeah.
And so it makes it easy for them to find it, whatever it is, if it's music, films, stage, whatever it is. And the cool thing, of course, is that when consumers will start to purchase and enjoy culture that's made from non-woke creators, that will defund woke capital in the process, right? In a sort of organic manner, right? So, which is sort of the true power of Newtown. Really, it sort of shifts wealth by its own design, right? Without the need of boycotting or, researching or do anything like that on any part, right?
Very cool. Awesome. So you sent us this great article I really enjoyed. This is for Wrong Speak. It's called "Why Aren't They Talking About Culture, Woke Capital, and the Arts?" So can you talk a little bit about what woke capital is and like why artists and creators should be concerned with woke capital?
Well, woke capital as sort of it's finally becoming sort of a buzzword, thanks to a few big books that have been released recently and so forth. And I'm not going to go into the ESG bit because that's quite the black hole of information, and I mean it's part of it, but it's sort of high level. But woke capital in a sense is any money that a corporation or entity of any kind, of any size, uses to further sort of a woke ideology, right? So a company like Microsoft, for instance, they actually decided that's their policy. They will not deal with any law firm that doesn't have a DEI framework in place, right? Or it doesn't abide, or it doesn't meet their criteria when it comes to diversity on their boards, right? And so that's sort of an indirect way in which woke capital works. But there's also a direct manner, and that's the topic of my next article, so to speak. But it's also I've also discussed this in the first one as well. So a big example is Jack. What's his last name again? The guy.
Dorsey?
Yeah, there you go, Mr. Dorsey, who gave Ibram Kendi $10 million for his anti-research center.
Jesus.
I forgot he did that, to be honest, because Jack, to me, Jack was really kind of a free speech libertarian in a way. Like, he started off that way, and he just got so swept up in the Great Awakening, and it was sad to see him do that because, I don't know if this was more apparent to other people, but is there a bigger grift than Kendi and the how to be anti-racist? Because it's he coined this term playing on the idea that I think we can all agree racism is bad, right? No one is pro-racism,
right?
As in treating people differently based on their race. And we, as much as the media wants everyone to believe that we don't talk about race enough, it's literally all we talk about. And white people especially are very sensitive to being labeled a racist because we're taught at a very young age how horrible it is. So playing off that, he comes in and says, like, to all you white people, actually, it's not enough to be not racist. You must be anti-racist. And us white people go, well, I know racism is bad, and I thought I was doing a good job of not being racist, so I don't know what this anti-racist thing is. Why don't you teach me? And he goes, funny you should ask. I happen to have written a book called How to Be Anti-Racist. That is like, I love it because it's very American. It's like very much the snake oil salesman. And like, I love fraudsters and just like unctuous salesmen because that's like part of our DNA as Americans, but like just not in this context. And that being said, like we should be able to spot it better now. And we just haven't as a culture.
Well, there is actually a bigger grift than that, and that's when the ESG index comes in, actually. So now companies and corporations, and that includes corporations that do culture, right, mainstream culture, they now more and more abide by this. It stands for equity, sustainable growth, equitable, sustainable growth, something like that. And so the higher your ESG index is, the more investable you become.
These are fucking. This is social credit. Like
it is social credit for corporations. So for instance, one of the crazy example that I know of is that Tesla, who makes electric cars, for crying out loud, has a lower index than Nike. Right?
Who uses slaves?
Yeah, because but despite the fact that Nike uses child to make sneakers, they have in place a DEI framework within their company, and so on, and everything that flows from that. Whereas Tesla, even though their main product is, it's a lot more environment friendly and sustainable than Nike, they don't have they don't bother with that stuff, right? As we know, Elon Musk is not woke, so his company woke, and so that's sort of the the irony here, right? It's like it doesn't make sense, but that's the way it goes. And the big corporations, the big mainstream corporations, they all have DEI networks by now, all of them, and that's why my next article is about the wokification of the cultural industries, and I don't even talk about mainstream actually in that article. It's all about sort of the public money that goes into culture, that funds culture, and also the private money when it comes to foundations, right? And these people, especially the foundations and the private foundations, the private trusts, they fall in the same line as well. They don't have the ESG index, but they all have sort of a DEI framework. And not only that, but they ask that the grantee, the people who will fund, that they will fund, their efforts, they have to abide by the same type of framework, right? So it really is something top to bottom.
Yeah.
Really.
Can you give some like specifics of the frameworks? I think a lot of people are familiar with, you have to have a certain amount of like non-white people or women, or I don't know if it gets into sexuality or gender or whatever, or like, do you know any more specifics?
Well, I surveyed a ton of organizations for my latest and upcoming article, and none of them really had specifics, at least on the surface, right? When you look at their website and in the outline of their framework and their sort of equity section of their website, it's very much buzzword and woke lingo, but I never found any like, okay, we need that amount. I mean, of course, when it comes to gender representation, you can assume that they want 50-50, right? Meritocracy is dead. It's like, it's 50-50 or else we're bigots, right? So, but more than that, when it comes to racial representation, right? There's never any quotas. I never found any quotas or any specific numbers. Now, that being said, they're still very specific about their goals, right? They want to revolutionize the cultural industries. They want to implement new ways of funding culture, new ways of distributing cultures, and so forth. And they want to do that through the DEI lens, right? Through social justice. And there are even some organizations, even though their sole purpose is to give out grants that will help produce culture. They don't even call themselves social, cultural organizations. They call themselves social justice organizations. Right. So it really is. I mean, the activism has taken over.
Yeah.
Right. The fact that, hey, you're supposed to promote culture here, but you're not even. That's not even what you do. Right. You're more about promoting some sort of social justice and whatnot.
Right. I often refer to this as like ideological entrapment, because it's like the way they present it to you at first. So a few years ago, I used to work for a Silicon Valley startup, and the DEI policies and initiatives, they creep up on you, and they present them to you in a way where they're hard to argue against. So that they'll be like, hi, we want to cast as wide a net as possible in the hiring process, and we want to do away with any discriminatory policies and create an environment in the office where everyone feels safe and comfortable. And okay, yeah, that sounds fine. Sure, I'm cool with that. And it's like, where it's like you would have to be like a cold-blooded monster to disagree with that. But then they start sneaking in the implicit bias tests and the quotas, and then so then by the time you basically become like indoctrinated into a cult, and you don't realize it because they made it seem like it was this wonderful, fair, compassionate thing.
Yeah, it's the classic. I think I have a chart of logical fallacies that I keep on my desktop. I open it up. It's a PDF that I open up from time to time to refresh my memory, and they have to update it now because the Mott and Bailey, right? That's what you're talking about, right? This has become so popular amongst the woke, because it's like, well, you agree that racism is a bad thing. Of course, I agree. Who, like Ben said earlier, who doesn't agree with that, right? So, but then that's the easy thing to agree on. But then they take you to such an extreme, and when they see that, well, when they feel resistance or something to that effect, they go back and say, well, you agreed earlier that you're against racism, so what's the problem? And for most people, it's a sleight of hands. They don't see it coming at all. They're like, well, I guess you're right. I should do more. I should be more careful and think about my own biases or privilege or whatever that is, right?
Right.
So yeah, it's become their favorite weapon in their arsenal, and they sneak it up on you, and I've grown to smell it a mile away.
Yeah. Well, it's not.
Now
we talk a lot about language on this show, and I think when you say sneaking up, one of those things is changing what words mean, like what racism means, what diversity means, what I mean, shit, we see like what black means. Like we saw people a couple years ago saying, well, no, you have to be politically black is what we're talking about. It's not even your skin color. That was the Pulitzer Prize winning author of the 1619 Project,
Nicole Hannah-Jones.
So and then it's also not just changing what words mean as in like the definition, but how they're applied also. Like violence is a new one. Like silence is violence, or criticism is violence instead of just criticism or an opinion or whatever it is. And then I think the biggest, I feel like it was Nazi for a while, and that is turned into white supremacy in the past year and a half, 2 years. It's like, well, this is white supremacy or centering whiteness, or these sorts of terms that, that doesn't, it's, you need to ascribe to their sort of language, which becomes like shibboleths. And if you don't use it in those ways, then you're, like you said, like a bigot or a bumpkin and uneducated. And then you want to, especially if these are the people who might, they are not always necessarily the boss. I think they are going to be soon, but they're the DEI coordinators in the ear of the boss, and you don't want to get fired, and you just want to put your head down and do your job. And it is tough for people to stand up to this, because a lot of the issues I have I tend to be pretty left wing on a lot of economic issues, especially labor rights. And I see that the management class, they love this shit because they get to feel good about themselves, check off boxes, while not actually helping the workers at all, not giving them raises or better hours or anything like that. And I think the best example is Amazon. Although plaster Black Lives Matter all over their website, and then they're quashing trying to form unions in Bessemer, Alabama, which is 85% black. The plant down there. So like those black lives don't matter. It's just which is, I think, the last thing I'll say is it's the ultimate saying is Black Lives Matter. It's inarguable. So if you say that you're against Black Lives Matter, then they take it literally as you're saying Black lives don't matter, which is, of course, that's not what we're saying. We're saying that the organization itself is a neo-Marxist corrupt organization. 60 million of the 90 million dollars has gone unaccounted for, but that's not what they want you to argue about. They want you to, take a step back from, well, you're saying Black lives don't matter, which of course is just not true.
Right.
Well, and the biggest problem we have too is that the people in power right now, the people who run these companies, who run these foundations and these, nonprofit organizations that fund culture, for instance, they might be woke now, but in 5 to 10 years when new positions open up or people retire, that they're going to be replaced by the people who are now being formed in academia, which is as woke as you can imagine, right? So it's going to be, and they believe, the 20-year-old today, someone said on Twitter the other day, I think it was brilliant. He said 90%, 95% of people 70 years and, your grandparents, right? 95% of your grandparents are not woke, right? Yeah. Whereas 50% of the 20 and younger are woke. Right. So that's, if we think the world is woke right now, let's imagine what's it going to be in 5 to 10 years. Right.
Yeah.
They'll redouble their efforts more than likely. And this, you guys in America, it's all about race and black and so forth. But here in Canada, it sort of takes on a different form. I mean, a lot of black people here would like to make us believe that, there's systemic racism in Canada, but I mean, it just doesn't fly. It's completely But our version of DEI, so to speak, is our relationship with the indigenous, right?
Yeah.
And so for them, you have words like colonizer and right. So it's all about decolonizing, the white people, the big bad white people who impose their European, set of values onto how we should do things. I mean, geez, my forebears were born in Europe, but that was like 300 years ago. It's like, come on, right? It's like, I'm not European at all, right?
Right.
Yeah. So I was going to ask for the kind of Canadian perspective on this, because actually this is our second Canadian guest in a row, Joe, right?
Yeah.
As the rule is, as long as you're not Australian, that's the rule. So, welcome. And I think an example would be, I think it was 2 summers ago when there was that quote unquote like uncovering of the mass graves of Indigenous children that was like, well, covered up, metaphorically by the Catholic Church. And then it turned out like it was just not true at all.
No, it wasn't true at all. They didn't find anything. They just found, turns out it was just dead branches and stuff buried in the ground.
Yeah, but the media,
not to mention, just want to add that quickly, not to mention that, the Indians on the reserves where the residential schools were located were fully aware that there were children buried, because a lot of children back in the 50s and 40s and whatnot, a lot of them died of disease, because it was the health system was not what it is today, and health measures were not what they are today, and cholera and all scurvy, and all kinds of disease that was still going on back then, and yellow fever and whatnot, right? So the vast majority of the children that were buried in mass graves were buried or burned there because they were, they died of a disease. And I mean, that doesn't negate the horrible treatment that they've received. And Jordan Peterson had a native artist on his podcast recently, and he patrons this guy. He's been patroning this guy for years. Yeah. His name is Charles Smith, and he recounted, I guess the two of them known each other for a long while, and on that time, it's very recent. You guys should check it out. It's very hard to watch, but he recounts, what happened in the residential school, and it's It's just absolutely horrible. And most Canadians that are aware of it are think that it's a blight on our history. But it's like, what can we do about it?
Right.
Right? It's like those residential schools are gone now, and I'm 44 years old. I was born in '77. I wasn't part of any decision making that made these residential schools possible, or you know what I mean. It's like,
Right.
how can I be responsible for any of this?
Wow.
And for us, I mean, I think there's the same for you as well in America, although it's a different name, but it's generational guilt, right? It's like, well, you're the son, and it's like, yeah, well, my grandfather was a jockey. Actually, he wasn't some high, high up in some government agency, right?
Right.
So if you want to dig into my family tree, go right ahead. I mean, I'm from very humble beginnings, so but still, it's like it's like we're going into generational guilt now. I mean, where does it end, right?
What is I'm pretty ignorant about this, and it's like shocker, an American's ignorant about something Canadian. What is the so here the Native American population? We do have a troubled history with reservations, and even to this day there's really intense violence and alcoholism and drug abuse. Is that well, and I mean, they're kind of getting us back by taking all our money in the casinos, which is fine. But is there that sort of issue in Canada with the is it called First Nation?
Yeah, First Nations, yes.
And
right.
do they, or is there like reservations, or are they just kind of sprinkled throughout cities and towns?
Yes, there are reservations, and every 5 years there's always a scandal that emerges, because most of the reservation, I wouldn't say most, a great many reservations are run by people who just pocket all the money that comes from the government, don't give a rat's ass about the welfare of the people that live on the reservations. And these are people that are a member of the nations, right? It's not like they're white, in charge of of the administration of the reservation, right? It's part of the people, right? And so every now and again there's this, there's a story that will come up in the news and say, oh, like 200 grand was spent on building an arena when most of the people on that particular reservation doesn't have access to good water, right? And so it's I mean, of course, not all reservations are like that, but a lot of them are very remote. A lot of them are way up north, and they live under very harsh conditions. And so basic human rights are being violated. And the problem I have with the woke is that they're completely not clueless. I think they know about it, but they don't take that into account at all. For them, it's all about, what we did is so wrong that any wrong that they do is canceled, right? Or something like that. And so, under the Harper government before Trudeau, there was serious talks about, okay, you want money, that's fine, but we need to have total transparencies from every reservation. We need to know where the money goes. You need to have accountability. And there was this huge uproar and so on and so forth. So, and not to mention that I think there's at least 600 First Nations in Canada, and none of them agree on anything. So it's a perpetual problem. They'll never have, I mean, as far as I can tell, I don't think there's a solution inside, because none of them will ever all agree on the way forward. And not to mention that most of them have elected officials, but they have what they called ancestral leaders, or something like that, where it's like a leadership that's elected by the people, but but not in a democratic sense. It's more about the cultural affairs of their own tribes, and they have a say in the democratic process. So it's quite the mess.
So I wanted to go back to, I don't know if this is a cultural difference between like the US and Canada, but you were kind of talking about, it sounded like that, does the government provide more of the funds for art up there? Like, is that a regular thing? 'Cause from the way you were speaking, that's kind of what it sounded like, which I don't think we have nearly as much here. I mean, of course, like for instance, the Museum of Natural History is free in New York City. or I think it is, if or at least if you're like in New York or New Jersey or Connecticut or something like that. But like I think I'd heard that Canada's government is like much more involved in arts and culture. And if that's the case, is there like does it matter a lot when there's a liberal government or a conservative government?
Well, that's you want to open Pandora's box here?
Yeah, that's what we do on this show.
Yeah, that's the very crux of my next article. It's analyzing the funding system that's comparing the American one versus the Canadian one, and yes, there is a huge difference, and I would say that the biggest one is that mainstream culture here is very much publicly funded. Whereas, mainstream culture in America, it's all private and corporate.
Okay,
right?
That's what I figured.
So, but it goes much further than that. It starts all the way to the top with the Department of Heritage, right, at the federal level, and then you have the Council for the Arts, which is sort of the equivalent to the NEA in America, the National Endowment for the Arts, which is sort of the federal agency that funds the art or funds, the lower level, the states and the local governments and whatnot. And then, of course, you have provincial councils, which have a different purse than the Canadian Council. And then you have on the city level, like in Toronto here, you have a Toronto Council for the Arts, in Vancouver as well, in Montreal you have one, and so forth, right? So, but, like for instance, Schitt's Creek, a huge TV show, that was funded. They received $26 million from the Canadian Media Fund over their 6 years run, and even though it won Emmys, it won like 9 Emmys, right? And so that's as mainstream, a
Canadian show.
and that's as mainstream as you can imagine. And yet it was funded. I mean, they had some private investment, but their initial funding came from the CBC, which is Canada's public television, and then the Canadian Media Fund, which is it's a public corporation that's half government, half major Canadian broadcasters, and so they've provided 26 millions. That's roughly what, like $4 million a year a season, which is a lot of money. And even films like from David Cronenberg, a very huge film director. His last film was financed by Ontario Creates here, and then Telefilm Canada as well. So mainstream culture is part of it, and even more than that, if you take it on a proportional level, the Council for the Arts provides more money than the NEA, right? So a third more. Right. So that's how deep the culture of public funding is in this country, right?
Yeah, we're a much bigger country.
Yeah. Well, proportionally, right? So
no, that's what I'm saying.
But still, it's huge, and not to mention the media. I mean, all the media, even all the private medias have subsidies from the government, all of them. Right, the private ones as well. That's why if you ever talk to non-woke Canadians, they all tell you it's like our media is just completely corrupt in one way, because they all have the same talking points, and no surprise, right? And of course, running through all of that chain of funding now, and I mean, even it's been in place for more than now. It's been in place for many years. It's all woke. It's all completely woke, and really heavily woke. I mean, we got you beat on the wokeness.
Oh, really?
Yeah, by a long mile.
Well, what they say. They say America's biggest exports are culture. So
yeah, well, so I mean, and I actually break down the Council for the Arts strategic plan in my next article, and they released it last April, and it's a 5-year plan, and chief among their objective is to decolonize Canadian culture.
Oh, geez.
Right. So the goal here is like whoever you are, as long as you're not a white man, that's we don't want you. Right.
You should say we decolonized back in 1776. So I don't know. That's an American joke.
Will it surprise you that the new head of the council is, a member of the First Nation? Right.
Naturally.
And the thing is that I've looked at this guy's history, and he's been part of culture at the highest level for 30 years. He hasn't been he hasn't been prevented from any opportunities whatsoever. He has, you know what I mean? There's no, but when you read the strategic plan, it seems like only now finally minorities and women and people of, on the LGBTQ spectrum, now they can finally take their rightful place in culture, which is total BS, because why does this guy had a 30-year plus career in culture? He worked for the Toronto Film Festival, for crying out loud. He was responsible for the Lightroom, which is the nicest film venue here in Toronto, and a hub for the Toronto Film Festival, which is the biggest film festival in North America, at least, right? And so it's like, dude, you were never oppressed.
Right. It's funny that it's always the most privileged people who are going around lecturing everyone on their privilege.
So I wanted to ask, kind of continuing with one of my favorite concepts of like the fraudster and grifter. One of my kind of, I guess, subcategories of that, and Joe will know this, is I love what I am calling transracial, because I believe we're headed towards a transracial society. And if you haven't noticed, in the United States, what used to happen was, and you could tell who was oppressed then, was that very, very light-skinned, let's say Black people. We have like the one drop rule here. If you look, we have a famous case called Plessy versus Ferguson, which was about segregation. And if you look at Homer Plessy, I believe that was his name, you would think he's white, but he was considered Black by the standard. So that was back then. So you would have really, really light-skinned Black people, or non-white people try to be white. But now we have the exact opposite, where it seems like professor after professor at American universities are being caught of not being pretending to be either, usually it's Black or some type of Middle Eastern or Latina or something like that. I think it's all women. I don't know if there have been any men yet to do that, but
I've only seen female professors do that. I haven't seen male
and then famously Elizabeth Warren, who was our so you know who she is. Well, Trump would call her
that woman.
Pocahontas.
Wasn't there that woman as well that was head of some big organization, and she said, "Yeah, I'm Black," and
Rachel Dolezal was like a big one. But there have been several since then. Oh, and Alec Baldwin's wife, who's like a white lady from Massachusetts, who put on a very offensive fake Spanish or Mexican, I believe it was Spanish accent, when she like very much knew what she was doing and would pretend to not understand words. So there's a question here I have, is there this issue in Canada, but I'm assuming it would be more the kind of First Nations population, because I think that would be our equivalent to like what would be I call the crit pyramid, lowest rung on the ladder. Would be like Black Americans.
Well, here in Canada, if you have a First Nation ancestry, you can, if you know for a fact that you do have it, and I don't know the ratio here, but you can have sort of the First Nation accreditation, right? So
same with here.
Identify as one because that's part of your heritage. Technically, I remember my mother passed a few years ago, but I remember when I was scanning before she passed, I was scanning all the family photos, and I remember when very old photo. I think it was my great grandmother. So her grandmother on her mother's side, was this very old black and white photos from back in the 1920s, and when I had that picture in my hand, she said, "You know what? She was like pure Indian." Right. And so I have, we all do in North America to some extent, because we all have sort of intermingled throughout, the centuries. But if you do have some sort of, not so faded heritage, you can just apply. And then, whenever you have dealings with the government in any way, shape or form, there's always a box, it's like, do you identify as Métis or Inuit or, First Nation? And then you just say yes, and you enter probably the number that's on your card, right? Because you get a card, sort of an ID, right? and it grants you exemption from taxes and other stuff like that. So it's already in place. It's already been in place for a long time, and I think you don't even have to proclaim it. You just, hey, here's my card.
So I answered my first question here, and I thought this was American, so I went back and checked. It is Canadian. This is an article from, I don't know why there's not a date, but Canadian academic on leave amid row over Indigenous ancestry claims. And it says the investigation, Carrie Bourassa, has drawn comparisons with the case of Rachel Dolezal in the U.S. And that's exactly what she did. She was an academic specializing in Indigenous health issues, has been placed on administrative leave from her university, of course, after investigation challenged her claims of Indigenous ancestry. Métis, herself as having Métis, Anishinaabe, and Tlingit heritage. And don't think she's any of those.
And Métis is so vague, it's like anyone can claim, because by definition, when you're Métis, you're half, right? You're like, your mother was native and your father was black.
Oh, is that what Métis means?
Yeah, that's exactly what it means.
Oh, okay.
So if your grandparents were Métis, then you could just turn.
She's not even that. And the reason I'm laughing is because it's not like she was a Moroccan or Southern Italian or something. She was Russian, Polish, and Czechoslovakian. like wide right by a mile. Like that's my favorite. It's like, pick something closer. I don't know.
But I could go anywhere and sort of claim that I am. I mean, if I were to apply, say, for funding, if I have an art project and I want to apply for the funding, they would verify my claim. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Right. But I could go out and about and just claim that I am Métis or whatever. Right. And then people would just go, oh, okay, that's cool. And probably
because if they would question you, that'd be a racist thing. So.
And I actually, I'm not like saying.
But if I wanted to grift, if I wanted to grab the grift, and I could easily do this because it's not like it doesn't really show, right? It's not like you have characteristics, physical characteristics that can easily pinpoint and say, hey, because Native people, they have sort of an Asian, characteristics to them, right? I mean, you can, some stronger than others, right? But there's still something that your eye can catch on. But when it comes to Métis, it's like,
well, the reason I say this is because the barriers for this gets so like nebulous. It's like what something has now become just identifying, and if that's going to be the case for things like gender, it's going to become the same thing for race. It's going to be like, I identify as this, and when that becomes acceptable, people are going to start identifying as what is most beneficial to them, obviously. And a reverse example of this, which I think will come to the US, would be like in India, is really, really common and like part of the culture to lighten your skin, because over there they have the caste system, and like the darker people are treated worse. Like it's actually racist. Like, or I don't know if it's race necessarily. I'm not gonna get into that, but like lighter skin is more sought after. So people lighten their skin. We're like, if I showed you this picture of this non-native woman trying to pretend she's native, like it looks like she really darkened her skin. Now you can go tanning, of course, but like if you're doing that in conjunction with pretending to be a race that you're not, like it starts to get pretty sticky here. And I do think this is going to become more and more common to the point where it becomes like acceptable. And it's about your lived experience, and you can just kind of make shit up.
Well, the grift is already happening actually in the cultural industry, because I've had, and I include that in my next article, because it's, when you have people, I mean, this is happening in the US, but here in Canada, across the levels of funding, you have the Ontario Council for the Arts now has priority groups, right? So if you identify as part of a priority group, and they didn't mention who they are, I think we can guess, right? You will have a greater chance of receiving funding. You will, I mean, hence the word priority,
right?
So, and I was in a clubhouse room Geez, I think it was.
That was a mistake.
It was, and it was during those. I think it was last year during those time when churches were burning up here, and so someone, an American, made a room about Canada and like what's going on, and so there's a lot of Canadians that ended up going in that room, and there's this guy, and he's like, I couldn't believe it. I still can't believe it. But there's this guy is like, hey, you know, my name is this, and I'm in Toronto, which is where I am, and I'm a filmmaker, and my mother is Iranian, right? But I was born here. You know, my father's Canadian, but my mother's Iranian, and I was born here. But when I apply for granting at the, you know, whatever council, whether it's the Toronto, the Ontario, or the you know, the federal one, you know, at the section of the questionnaire where, you know, do you identify with, you know, he said, yeah, of course, I'm checking the South Asian box, and he's just like, I don't even care, but I know that doing so will provide me with a greater chance of getting the funding. Grift already, you know, it's already corrupted.
Right.
How many of those do this, right?
Yeah.
And so this guy, you know, he gave me the impression. He gave me the impression that he wasn't even woke. You know, he wasn't even. You know, he was just like, hey, you know,
practical.
Screw that. Yeah, exactly. Screw that. You know, it's like self-interest. You know, what better way to kill, you know, meritocratic culture than self-interest, right?
Well, what you would hope would happen is, I do think that there's this. I think it's broken a little, but this assumption that like all of the like all the white crits want and believe that like everyone else is on their side, right? Doesn't matter if you're Iranian or First Peoples or Black or whatever it is. And like, that's obviously not the case. In fact, a lot of, you know, anti-woke people or whatever you want to call it are not white. So you would hope that someone like that uses the funding, gets it, uses that system, and then goes and makes heterodox art, or you know, makes a movie or write or something like that. That then,
yes,
you know, and then it's gonna be hard for them to criticize him, because you can say, well, so you're criticizing a South Asian.
Yeah, well, I think you're vastly overestimating the sophistication of these people.
Yeah, I know. Well, Clubhouse is where like logic and reason goes to die.
No, but I mean, you know, it's not. I mean, I don't know about you guys, you know, in your own corners, but I you know, I realized very early on that it's not because you're an artist that you're sophisticated, right? You might do sophisticated art, but that doesn't mean you as a person, you know, you're a sophisticated person, right?
Right.
And so, you know, and this guy, you know, screamed just that, right? It's like, I'm just gonna hop on that train, you know, and you know, profit from the grift as long as it is, and
that
it, you know,
that really bothers me, because so you know, I'm living in LA, and my roommate and I we're trying to work on some short horror films. That's partly why we moved to LA, is to get closer to the industry. And you know, we'll look at, you know, some fundraising platforms and rewards. So you could submit like, you know, a small proof of concept, and then you can, you know, apply for grants or crowdsource, whatever. And of course, they always prioritize, you know, diverse projects. And it's funny because, like, you know, I'm Mexican, and my friends like, dude, like, that's it. Like, we've got our diversity right there. You're Mexican. Just say that you're, or you can just say you're Latinx. Like, that's like right off the bat. Like, just add an X to your thing. But that's the thing though, where it's like, you know, I can make up any weird identity that I want. I'm queer, I'm trans, I'm this and that, I'm whatever. I'm a mix of this, I'm non-binary. It's like, they're not going to check for that. Like, they're not going to like.
No, they will. Like, all right, time to suck a dick, Joe.
Well, you know, you're right. They probably sometimes they won't check. But here's the thing. You know, I don't know about you. You know, LA is pretty big, but still, I mean, the entertainment industry is a very small world. And word travels fast, right? So if you, Joe, you know, claim to be Latinx, you know, just to be, you know, someone will know at some point, right? It's gonna leak somewhere, and it's like, well, that Joe guy, you know, he's just a phony in the, you know, in the fact he's not really part of us, right? He's not committed to diversity, blah blah blah. He's just grifting, right?
He's not politically Mexican.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So you have to be careful here, right?
Oh,
because you don't want to put the whole place to your back. You want to sort of keep it at bay and try to extract as much juice as you can until they realize you're not woke, right? But my experience with the Toronto Festival was quite revealing. I mean, I attended like 5 in a row, and the second year, that's when I was like, hey, I know I've seen this guy last year, I've seen this woman last year, and like 20% of the people I saw the second year was people I met or saw in the business center of the festival, throughout the festival the year before. I was like, oh, okay. Right. And then the next year it's like, oh, now it's not 20%, it's like 40% of the people that I recognized from the 2 years before. And so it's and then and they're all intertwined, right? The music industry, the film industry, and so they're all very much intertwined, and it's very small, right? So it's in for myself, I sort of canceled myself intentionally because I know they were going to cancel me anyway. And I was actually warned. I was actually told by two producers in 2018. Okay. In 2018, I was told by two producers, like, look, dude, if you're a guy and you're white and you haven't made your first feature yet, and what I mean by that is that in Canada, we talked about this earlier, because it's public funding. Once you've successfully infiltrated the system, so to speak. So as soon as you have your first film finance, right, it's easier to get your second film finance, right? Because it will depend on how your first film fared, right? If it's popular, they do have some performance metrics, right? But still, as soon as you sort of, when you're in the game, right, it's always easier. And so that's what I mean by that, so these two guys, and one was in Toronto, one was in Vancouver. It was two separate discussions, and they told me the same thing. If you haven't made your first feature right now, forget it. It's over because of quotas. Right? It's like you're never gonna get funding in this country.
That's crazy.
In the public, forum. I mean, I could go out and raise money privately.
Sure.
But, in Canada, we don't have a culture like that. We don't, believe me, I've tried. I've raised some money for feature film that I'm preparing, and I'm grateful for my investors, but it's really a tough game in this country. I mean, people just don't really care at all about this. Whereas in America, right, it's almost a tradition, right? So how many investors would just chip in, a few grands here and there because, hey, why not? I'll diversify my portfolio, and I'll take maybe a risk here and, play with my money a little bit, and you know what I mean? So, instances of artists here in Canada who get private funding is like so rare. It's almost like an eclipse, right? So
it's sad because I'm definitely in favor of democratizing access to funding and resources for aspiring artists. I think that's wonderful. But I mean, it's getting crazy that it's replacing merit with superficial characteristics as the metric of one's talent.
No, absolutely. That's what it is about now. It's like it's like when you read the application forms, right? It's like whatever your project is, it's like last. It's like who you are, who do you identify with, what will your project support or shed light on inequalities in our society, or so on and so forth. I was talking to a young writer in Britain. She's in London, and she's an inspiring scriptwriter, and she was applying for a contest at the BBC. And the first thing the woman there asked her was, okay, well, you understand that, whatever project you want to propose for the contest, it needs to take into consideration your struggle as a woman.
Yeah.
And she was like, I don't care about this,
What if she
it has nothing to do with this, and guess what happened? She submitted her proposal, and she got as you know, we received countless submissions and yours was not selected. Better luck next time, blah blah blah. Right? And so it even kills potential from people who are supposed to be marginalized.
Right.
Because in her case, she's a woman, right? But she doesn't abide by this woke BS, right? She just wants to be an artist and do whatever she feels is right. And she's denied opportunity because of of not thinking the right way.
Yeah.
I had a similar thing when actually it was a Canadian publisher. I've written a few novels, and I just am an independent writer because I don't want to. It's not like I've attempted to go traditional publishing, but it was actually Joe after I was on Alex's show. We did a show about like just fiction writing, and she works at a publishing house in Canada. I don't know which one. I wouldn't say anyway, but she reached out to me and she was like, your work sounds really interesting, and I just want you to know that like I work in publishing, and it is extremely difficult to publish like a white man now. And I'm like, oh well, thanks for reaching out. It's very demoralizing because it's like if you don't want to publish my work based on the quality of it, a story, you don't think it's, even if it's like, well, this is great writing, but it's not marketable, and we live in capitalist society. Fine, I'm fine with that. But like just based on who I am. It's people call it an overcorrection, and what I say, there's another word for overcorrection. It's called hypocrisy. It's like I understand that certain people weren't allowed to perform or have their a black woman couldn't have her novel published 100 years ago, and that's fucking sucks. Like Zora Neale Hurston's book didn't come out, I think, until after she passed away, and Their Eyes Are Watching God, I believe that's what it's called, and that's really shitty. Like that really sucks. But now there's so many opportunities. There's so many people who want to read and watch movies and watch TV shows. And it just, I don't understand why we are, I shouldn't say we, I mean the people, the gatekeepers, why they would keep something away from the people who hunger for culture. Like, why would you do that just based on race or gender or religion or whatever it is? The example I love to bring up, I believe we brought this up on our first ever episode, Joe, was, I should know his name by now, but I always forget. He was a poet, just like a white guy poet, right? And he sent in poem after poem, and he would get rejected. And he knew he was great, but he kept getting rejected. And I think it was weird to him because he had been published many times. He was really successful, and all of a sudden he was always getting rejected. So what he did was he changed his name to something like overtly Chinese, like very, very obviously Chinese, published the same exact, submitted the same exact poems, immediately published, like all of them. So it's like that is the most obvious example of it's not about the quality of the work. It's solely about the identity of the creator, which is, it just seems really dumb and unnecessary. And I always say this all the time, is that in my opinion, no group has had a bigger impact on at least American culture than Black Americans. Like, it is outsized. And gay Americans, they have had the biggest impact on American culture. So I don't understand this whole these quotas and this need for diversity. Like, we already have it naturally. And actually, I think it is so great. I think that Black Americans specifically have made such amazing music and movies and art and all these things because of what they've had to go through. And a lot of those stories, so this is so superficial, and the blues, which was the foundation for rock and roll, which is the foundation for like all American, metal. Metal, pop, punk, all of that stuff comes from the blues and Southern Miss, like the most demoralized and shit on and like oppressed people were like Black Americans in the Deep South, and they created the blues. Like, if that doesn't show, I don't like. I mean, they do say you should suffer for your art, but I mean, no one wants to actually do that. Like, it shows right there. Like, they suffered and they made the bedrock of American culture. And I get the criticisms like, well, Elvis stole that, and Elvis is the probably the most famous. But I like Elvis. I think he's made great music. But I think now people know that, like, and Elvis also, I think, would admit, like, yeah, he was inspired by these Black musicians and these Black artists. So I just don't understand this because it's unnecessary. It's kind of go ahead.
It reminds me of something that happened on Medium to me about a year and a half ago. So do you guys remember this case of it was basically racial segregation at a library somewhere in Washington. It's in King County, Washington. So I read an article about that, and And from the title of the article, it was not misleading and wasn't intentional misleading. It actually was racism. It was about racial segregation. And I said, something about how terrible racial segregation was at this library, and then a woke publication, an extremely woke, activist-oriented publication on Medium, reached out to me and said, "Hey, we liked your article. Would you can we feature it in our publication?" I'm like, yeah, sure, go for it. And it's like, I think they only saw the title. They thought racial segregation as in like we're pushing blacks away, and in fact, it was we're separating whites and blacks. And then it got a bunch of traction because it was a pretty big publication. I got a bunch of traction. I made a decent amount of money from that article. And then probably, I think about a month or so after it got published in the publication, they're like, "Hey, we're gonna cut your article from the publication.
Doesn't fit our narrative."
Maybe that's when they read it, or maybe they saw like all the negative comments that the article got. But I mean, like, that's the thing. It's like, yeah, racism is bad. It's like, yeah, cool, we want you. It's like, yeah, racism against white people is bad. Like, oh, get out.
Well, one of my favorite things is, I do talk about terms both white supremacist and Nazi are totally overused and used incorrectly 99.9% of the time. It's dumb and foolish, and at this point, just like just a stupid non sequitur. That being said, someone like Richard Spencer, who is an actual white supremacist and like a Nazi, I don't know if you know, he was a big deal kind of like 2015, 2016 this time. Yeah. And he's come out and said like he supports the Democrats because they are pushing segregation. Yeah. And it's like they have the same end goal, but just like different means. But like he looks at both sides like the left is actually the party that if there is going to be segregation, it's going to come from the left, not from the right anymore. It reminds me of like
political horseshoe.
Yeah, but there's something, maybe I'm wrong here, okay, but I noticed something, and I don't know if you guys watched that film, the Spike Lee movie, The Black Klansman.
Yes, yeah. I saw it. Yeah.
So so remember, there's a scene, where the head of the clan is sort of going in the region where I think it's somewhere in Montana, I think in Colorado. So so there's a scene and what's the name of the actor again? I forget his name, but the guy in, I'm sorry.
Wait, the John David Washington?
No, anyway, the guy who plays the head of the clan,
Oh, Topher Grace.
Yeah, Topher Grace. There you go. So, so the head of the clan, played by Topher Grace, visits, the Colorado, right? And so the scene take place in a basement of a church, and there's like 35 people there, right? Yeah. So and of course the film is set in the mid 70s or something like that, right?
I think so. 70s,
and so it's not like, I mean, I would assume that this is sort of a realistic depiction, right? And not only that, but you have in the scene you have fellow members of the clan who says, "Oh, I drove 5 hours from to get here." It's like they're not even from the place. It's only 35 people, and they're like they're scattered to the winds, right? Yeah. And so, but fast forward to the end of the film where Spike Lee introduced real footage of David Duke, right? And lo and behold, and that footage was taken from, I think, 2014 or something like that. There's still only 35 guys behind him.
Yeah.
So Spike Lee doesn't even realize that he's making a case against his film in his own damn editing, right? Because he's just proven to the world that the Ku Klux Klan is actually just a bunch of dudes. Right, that's all it is. It's not a movement. It's not going to take over anything, right? It's just a bunch of dudes. That's. I think they have 3,000 members nationally in the right. So it's like there's no such thing as white supremacy, right? I mean, it's almost like a boogeyman, right? At this point, right? Like scare children away, right? Yeah. Yeah. So and I was floored. I've been editing for 20 years, right? So I when I saw that, I was like, whoa, wait a second. It's like there's only 35 guys here. It's not like David Duke is speaking to a camera with 20,000 people behind him. No, he's just at some rally somewhere. Yeah. And that's what Spike Lee decided to include in his film. That's the incriminating evidence that he has, that white supremacy is such a blight on American society. That's the best you can come up with, right? And so I was like, dude, it's like, this is unreal.
Yeah.
This is unreal. And so but to come back to what you were saying earlier, Ben, why did they do this? In my research for my second article, I looked at foundations and nonprofit organizations that fund the arts, right? And I look at the people who hold positions of power in these organizations, and the vast majority of them have been part of that industry for a long time. That's what they do. They love to do that, right? They love to be part, and some of them have had positions somewhere in Europe, then they moved to America. Some of them are, were in Canada, and then they moved to the US, and they were part of like the New York Opera Company, whatever, right? And then moved back to Canada to head another foundation or another nonprofit organization. And all of these people, guys, they're all very progressive and left-leaning and have been forever. Right. I mean, our industry attracts people who are liberal and progressive. I was a liberal once. I voted liberal and even NDP for I don't know how many, at least 3 national election. And now I consider myself more of a center right guy. Right. Not because of I don't think I've changed that much. I think the goalposts have moved in that direction. Right. And so it's no wonder now that, imagine if you're a person like that. Imagine if you're at the head, if you're director of operation at the Andrew Mellon Foundation, which is the biggest foundation in America that funds the art. They give $200 million a year to the arts, right? And not mainstream, right? Local and regional art, right? So imagine if you're that person, and you've always been progressive, you've always been very liberal, and whatever your reasons are, right, for wanting to be woke, even before woke was a thing. Now suddenly you're part of a zeitgeist that legitimizes every desire for social justice that you've ever had, right? And so you live in a culture that's completely steeped into that. And not only that, but everybody that works with you in the foundation think exactly the same as you do.
Right.
So what do? Of course, you're going to implement, quotas. Of course, you're going to say, "Hey, we're fighting for justice." And some of them, I think it's not many of them. Some of them believe that. Some of them are blinded and they truly believe that they're doing something good. But for most of them, I think it's just a mean to grab power.
Right.
That's all it is. And you can find it. I mean, with all the organizations that I've surveyed, that I've looked at for my second article, it's plain to see. It's right there in their mission statement. It's right there in their DEI framework. It's like, now, we, as a national organization, we have the power and the responsibility to affect social change. And the Ontario Council for the Arts is the same thing, right? And so it's everywhere. It's completely ubiquitous. This sense of moral superiority, the sense that, hey, we have the power now to do something about this. And even though this is not a thing, I think we all agree on that, right?
Yeah.
So, but in their minds, they're the righteous ones, right? They're the ones who are bringing social change through culture, and they know the power of culture, right? They know full well what culture can do.
Yeah.
And they live in this echo chamber that feedbacks upon itself, right? That it's always like, you're just surrounded with people who think like you. So, and now power is given to them. The government is like, oh, you're fighting for injustice. Here's money. Right. And so what do you think they're going to do? They're going to say no, right? They're just going to grab power. Right. And so the reason why, Ben, you were rejected, by, this publisher, that's probably just what it is. Maybe that person in particular wasn't privy to that. Maybe she's not, but if you go into a board meeting of that publishing company, they know what's going on.
Oh yeah. No, I didn't even submit to them. She just reached out to me and told me that. It's like, yeah, we basically like don't publish white men anymore. It's like very rare. I didn't because I don't even bother traditional.
I'm actually
publishing.
surprised she reached out to you. I mean, why? What's the point? Is it to rub it in your face or?
No. She was very sincere. She heard me on a podcast on one I guess that we've had on before. I went on her show, and she just heard us talking about the future of fiction and kind of hyper identity politics and publishing, because the host of that show is much more in that world, kind of like the publishing and fiction world. And she's reached out to me on Facebook. Yeah.
So what can you talk a little bit more about, like the wokification of culture and the impacts it has on artists?
Well, more and more now. I mean, look at the example I gave you about the producers, right?
Yeah.
Earlier, like it's like because the producers in their mind, they know that they're going to spend X amount of time working on a funding application. They're going to spend weeks, if not months, working on that. And if they know that because the director is white, it's never going to go through. Why would they bother taking a chance on you, right? And so, but that's sort of the high level. But now more and more, I'm meeting local and regional artists who just do the same. It's like, I don't even bother applying for grants because just one look at the application form tells me that this is a waste of time. I'm never going to get it, regardless of the merit of my work, regardless of the merit of the project that I want to work on at this moment. Right. And so, what effects will that have, on the long run? I think it could be, we can speculate, but I don't think it's a leap of faith here. I mean, first of all, we're denying ourselves artists that could have gone on and make great work of arts, or even better, innovate in their field, come up with new techniques and new ways of creating, improving their craft, right? I mean, this is what's been going on since, centuries, right? It's not millennia. Artists improve upon their craft, every once in a while because technology becomes, more improved and so forth, right? And and so we're depriving, as a society, and I, even though I'm Canadian, I consider American and Canadian society on a cultural level to be fairly identical. We consume pretty much the same kind of stuff anyway. Right? So I'm from Quebec, so there's this French part, right, that consumes different stuff, and they have their own French production, but I grew up watching Star Wars and Aliens and Terminator, even though I'm French Canadian. So, listening to metal music and whatnot, right? So, but we're depriving that, and not to mention, what about the younger generation right now? That the 18-year-old kid who's like, who's seeing this? It's like, okay, well, I think I'm gifted and talented, but I know I'm not going to get into the biggest film school in the country because I'm white. Right. And because I can't get into the film school, I know it's going to hurt my chances at because when you get into either like the New York, the American Film Institute, or here in Canada, you have the Canadian Film Center. If you get in there, man, your career is almost underway because it gives you access to a tremendous network. It puts you in front of producers when they want to hear your pitch, and so that's like almost a guarantee once you graduate. And so if you're not, and as you guys know, it's very competitive, right? So if you have that advantage, it's quite something, right? So if you're a young filmmaker or musician or whatever, and you see this happening, it's like, okay, why should I bother? I know I'm talented, but thankfully now we have technology. You can just start a YouTube channel, and do short films and put it out there. But geez, artists are not, most artists, this is my experience, but I found that most artists are not enterprising in the least.
Right. They're not very business savvy. Yeah.
They're not business savvy at all. Exactly. Right. So, down the road, I think it will just make our culture more poor and mediocre. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And piggybacking off of that, my fear is the precedent that this is setting, where it's like, we like films and novels and poetry and music that has a social activist bent to it. So now you have a lot of young aspiring artists who are going, oh, I guess that's the type of stuff that I should be creating. So it's like, I'm going to rob I'm going to suppress my truly authentic voice, because I want to make it in the industry. So like, I'm afraid that we're just going to get more and more of this bland art that's inauthentic and that's just trying to appease, woke Twitter millennials, rather than actually blazing trails and diving into taboo topics and other things like we're not doing a very good job of celebrating artists who take chances and risks and push boundaries. Like we're really making we're making it obvious that we celebrate artists who stick to the rules and play it safe. Yeah, I have a lot of concerns about the quality of art that's going to come out.
Well, you know what? You're right on the money there. I was looking at. I stumbled upon a report. I think it was last year's report from an organization that look at the music industry in America as a whole, right? And gets data right out of sales and trends and whatnot, right? I don't recall it. It's pretty big. It's very official, but I don't recall their name. Yeah. And looking at their annual report, they made. In 2020, they made they conducted extensive surveys, and they found out that 55% of people, especially the younger people, require, they would prefer artists, and, in that case, musicians and bands, they prefer artists who are socially engaged.
Oh, jeez. Fuck, man.
Oh, there you go, man. There you go.
Yeah, we're already seeing that. But I gotta say though, there's a part of me that gets energized by this because I think some of the greatest art comes out of genuine suppression of ideas. It'll be really difficult, but at the same time, like there's this sort of like, because there are so many rules now about things you can and can't say. It's like cool. Like there are rules to break, which means there's history to make now. History is never kind to people who either play it safe or try to silence ideas. So I mean, yeah, like there will be a lot of sort of casualties. I don't mean people dying. I mean it's like there will be a lot of artists who have a lot of creative potential, but decide to self-censor, which is a shame. But I think at the same time, it kind of sets the stage for some true rebels to come along and really kick ass here.
So I think I'm a little more optimistic for a few reasons, at least. So one is just from the business side of it, like. In the US, we don't have this government involvement in the arts like you do in Canada, at least not to that extent. So it is what is popular. And I think that the want for kind of a lot of this social justice art, so to speak, is kind of losing steam. I think it had its peak. I think it peaked. And I think a lot of it isn't as interesting anymore. And it's just kind of... what's the term? Like propelled by profit. Like if it's profitable, it'll sell in America. That being said, though, like there's never been a better time to be an independent artist. I mean, look at the media. I mean, CNN, MSNBC, even Fox, like in the US, these used to be like the giants of media that controlled everything. And now you have podcasts and journalists who have gone into like actual journalists who have gone independent, who actually like change the narrative and change real policy. I mean, a Twitter account changed. It's going to change. I don't know if you've heard about this, Philippe, but in America, like Congress can trade stocks, and a Twitter account basically is changing that gained momentum, showing how corrupt it all is. Like that used to not be able to happen. Yeah. Or you had stock traders on Reddit change, this isn't art, but my point is that these things weren't possible before. And now you have someone like, everyone knows Joe Rogan, who's more popular than all of these shows combined. And I think you're going to see the same thing with artists. And I don't know if they're going to be the best movies, but look at is it Daily Wire or Ben Shapiro's group? They got really popular through social media, and they're making their own movies now. And who knows what they'll be like in 10 years. I think it's going to be a lot of like pro-gun and Second Amendments. I think they're big movies like a Western. But hey, whatever. If there's a market for it, there's a market for it. Yeah. And so I think the powers of the studio are going to have already been losing a lot of power, and that does open up space for independent artists to make and not only to make the art but to put it out there. I mean, that's why I'm so comfortable being an independent writer. Like, yeah, it'd be great. Don't get me wrong. It'd be great to be a New York Times bestseller. I would love that. But I'm not going to sacrifice my voice and the words I choose and the topics I write about to do that. Like, I'm going to write the exact stories that I want, and hopefully there's a readership. And one of my books has gained a lot of traction. And I would rather have that than have to appease the gatekeepers and lose like a piece of myself to do that. So I guess I'm a little more optimistic in that sense. But I do think it is different in Canada because of how involved your government is in the arts, where it could just all be junk and they just keep pumping out the cash flow to fund it.
Well, I'm sorry, Ben, but I disagree wholeheartedly with your optimism. I from where I sit, I think it's, well, first, you know, the artists who now are in, you know, academia or getting formed in art schools, they're super woke. That's what's coming next. And the executive at these studios, publishing houses, foundations, you know, they're just going to get woker because the new generation will replace the old one that is a bit less. And even though public funding in America is less than in Canada, it still is very thorough, and it's all woke as well. The NEA is woke. And I go down the chain of funding for an organization called New Music USA that's based in New York, and I in my next article, and so I break down the funding they receive from private foundations and public sources. And so they receive funding from the NEA, they receive funding from the New York Council of the Arts, and they receive funding from New York Cultural Affairs, which is sort of the New York City Art Council. And they receive money, and on the private side they receive money from the Mellon Foundation, they receive money from the Sphinx Venture Fund, and they receive I mean they receive money from a lot of people, but I use 3 examples. Now the funny thing is that the Mellon Foundation funds the Sphinx Venture Fund, but they also fund New Music USA, while Sphinx Venture Funds also fund New Music USA. And there's a high-ranking official at the Mellon Foundation that sits on the advisory board at the New York Cultural Affair agency, right? And everybody that sits on the advisory board at that agency comes from foundations or organizations that are fully woke.
Right.
So it's complete, right?
It's a big woke circle jerk, basically.
And on the mainstream side,
My favorite.
and on the mainstream side, I think, and the president of Nike was, you know, he was sort of very revelatory when he talked about ESG, and he was like, "It's okay if we lose a little bit of money. We don't really care," right? And as you know, perhaps Joe, you know a bit more, you know, because you're more in the film industry, but films don't cost that much money to make. You know, we might believe they're losing money, but believe me, they don't. They're not losing money at all.
Right.
Okay. So, and not to mention that Hollywood now is financed, almost like 30% of their financing comes from China. They just want to, Chinese investors just throwing money at America right now, at Hollywood. And so, and all the big Hollywood films, you know, it's like they're funded by like 25 people, the same 25 people anyway. They don't care, right? Because they're funding money because they want to avoid taxes and whatever their reasons are. They don't do it for the art, right? And so the big mainstream culture is they're not there yet. And even if they are, they're getting run by people who don't actually care if it goes down 1%, right? And it doesn't go down 1%. At all, because they have less cost now than they had, 10 years ago. They don't, films don't need physical media anymore. They could just be streamed, right? They don't need distribution anymore, right? Again, they can just be streamed, right? You don't need to send 2,000 copies of your film, right? You just send, a USB key a huge USB key, right? Because a digital film takes a lot of room, right? But still, you know what I mean? I mean, their costs go way down, and not to mention all the tax breaks that they get when in production, in post-production, and whatnot. That's actually going to be my next article. I'm going to break down a film budget and and show you you have the film budget, what it says at the budget line on Wikipedia, and then you have what pretty much what it costs. Those are two very different things. Right. And that's for film, right? When it comes to books, I mean, books are so cheap to make. It's like you pay the author, you pay the publishing house, and that's it, right? I mean, it's pure profit after that, right? Once you've paid off the material for the physical book, right? It's like it's pure profit, right? If it fluctuates 1, 2, 3, 4, 5%, they don't care, right? And so, but the what's going to save culture. And I want to circle back to Newtown here, so to speak. But what's going to save, and I mean, that's what Newtown is about. And you guys touched on that with Joe Rogan and Ben Shapiro and the other, and some other example is that the free market is still a valid option, right? And so that's why in the last 5 to 6 years, we've seen the rise of an alternative in news, right? That Joe Rogan and Ben Shapiro and Tim Pool and Dave Rubin, who launched his own locals platform. I think it's still doing pretty well. Jordan Peterson and all these guys, right? And they're doing very well. They're growing 20% every year, right? And that's very powerful, right? Because you as a consumer, you now have you can now say, and you know what, CNN, screw you. I'm not going to give you my eyeballs for 2 hours. I'm going to give it to Joe. And there's nothing you can do about it, really. Right. But culture hasn't followed, right? We don't have alternative to culture. Right. Meanwhile, there's a huge consumer base that's like, why is this not happening? Why don't we have options in culture the way we do with information? Well, it's because, culture is all done by the same type of people, right? It's all going in one direction, whether it's in Canada or in Europe or in America, of course, right? Yeah. And they own the distribution channels, right? They have their own. Right. So what are you going to do, right? But there is culture out there that is heterodox. There are, thousands and thousands of artists. Us three are like that, that just wants to produce culture. We know there's an audience out there that wants to consume culture that is just culture and not some form of indoctrination. Right. Just, hey, I want to put out something, and I'm sure some people will enjoy it. I think I have enough skills and talent to do something that's going to look professional. Yeah. Right. And so how do we connect? That's how we connect to that audience. Because Ben Shapiro is going to make what, 5 movies? In 5 years, 6 years, that's a drop in the ocean. It's nothing. And there are tons of consumers out there who don't even watch movies, or there's a ton of consumers who watch movies but have no interest in watching whatever Ben Shapiro is going to produce for whatever reasons they have. So he's going to reach what? He's going to reach that tiny percent of the consumer base. What about the rest, right? Right. Even if I gave you, even if Ben Shapiro had a magic wand and produced 100 films ready to be consumed by tomorrow, how many of them would you like to watch? Maybe 3 of them, maybe 5 of them tops, right? And we all have perfectly reasonable reasons for either choosing 3 or 5. It's all a matter of taste, right? Right. And so the idea here of Newtown is that it puts under one roof everyone that wants to produce culture that's heterodox. So the consumer, on the other hand, doesn't have to hunt for it, right? It doesn't, because with information, it's now easy, right? You can hop on Twitter and if you just spend a few days here and there, you start to, even if you don't know who Joe Rogan is, his name is probably going to pop out, right? But when it comes to culture, if you want to, let's say you're just an average Joe, right? And you turn on the television Saturday night and you're on Netflix and, oh, this show looks good, right? Okay, so by the description, it seems to be okay, and then you just press play and then boom, half an hour into the first episode, it turns woke on you, right? Like, oh, geez, here's half an hour I'll never get back. And, I'm not interested in that stuff anymore and I'll do something else. And so the idea of Newtown is that, well, if it's certified Newtown, you as a consumer, exactly that this thing is just culture, right? It's not about indoctrinating your child into, assuming another sex, or it's not about shoving down your throat the screenwriter's, ideological aspirations. It's just about either entertaining you or being what culture is supposed to be, which is a cultural experience, whatever it is. It could be a horror film, that Joe made. It could be a book that you Ben wrote, whatever the topic or whatever the story that you use to convey whatever you wanted to convey, right?
Right.
But when culture is done right, it's usually neutral. It's usually a receptacle that is all in the eye of the beholder, right?
Yes.
It's all. I mean, we can read the Lord of the Rings, and we can all see different things in the Lord of the Rings, and they're all valid, right? Because we project whatever biases we have onto those characters, and if we feel that the elves represents the connection to nature, that's fine. But it could be something else, right? And of course, the woke might see something completely different than what we see in the Lord of the Rings, and we have proof of that with the new series that Amazon is doing, right?
Yeah.
So, but the idea of Newtown is that for the consumers, the average consumer out there who doesn't have time to research, like, okay, last week I watched that TV show and it turned out to be woke. Now I want to watch that thing, but I'm not sure. So what am I going to do? Oh, I'm going to go on Wikipedia and look for whoever made that new TV show that I'm interested in, maybe to see if what they did before. Who has time for that?
Right.
Nobody has, even us. I'm sure we don't have time for that, right? And so the idea of Newtown is that just what a symbol, right?
Mm-hmm.
All you have to remember is this, and whether it's music, film, stage, literature, right? Anything that's made for kids, right? And I don't know if you know about what material is made for kids these days. It's just horrible, right? And the young adult novel industry is absolutely woke.
We talk about that a lot on the show.
Completely woke. And I know for a fact that there are young adult novelists out there that are just scratching their pulling their hairs out because they just want to do cool young adult stuff, but no one's going to publish them, right? And so for parents out there who have teenagers, like, hey, I'd like to buy something for my teenage girl, and it's fucking woke, right? And so, but if they happen to go on whatever, a store online, or even a physical bookstore, it's like, hey, this young adult, novel is Newtown certified. That means it's just a young adult novel. It's not going to try to indoctrinate my teenager, right? And so for a consumer, it's all just one thing. You just need to remember one thing, and that's what certification is, really, right? I mean, if you're kosher, right? If you're kosher, there's the core certification here on the Pepsi bottle. If you're kosher and you walk into a store, you look for kosher product, you find one, you're out the door. That's all you really need to know, right? So it's the same thing for culture, right? If you don't want to consume woke culture, then all you have to remember what Newtown and its logo stands for, and look for it. Right.
So like if Ibram X. Kendi were to submit anti-racist baby to Newtown, would you accept it, or would you? Okay.
No, Newtown will not accept that. So Newtown certifies culture on 3 levels, right? First of all is the content itself, right? I mean, nowadays it's sort of obvious, especially for us in the cultural industry, is to know if something is woke or not. And then, of course, the intent of the work from the creator's perspective, right? And so, if you, Ben, want to have your book published, or certified by Newtown, we're just going to interview you, and look at your social media, not 10 years ago, but in the last year or so, have short interviews with people that you've ended out as references to ascertain your character, right? And it's something that's fairly obvious, right? And then we sort of move on from there. That's the first step. The second step is we look at the means of distribution, the means of production, right? And the last step is the means of funding, right? So if you because the idea here is that if regular Joe watches a TV show on television that's Newtown, or purchases a film that's Newtown certified, but at the end, so if he does that, right, then that means that he's supporting a like-minded filmmaker, right, directly, but he also defund woke capital in the process, because he's not giving his money to a woke film studio. right?
Right.
But what good does that do if at the end of that process, the profit, or at least a portion of that profit from that sales, goes back into the woke monster because the studio that owns the studios that made the film is woke, right?
Right.
And so the idea of Newtown is that we also take into consideration the means of distribution, the means of production, and the means of funding, right? And it's not going to be a be all end all, right? It's going to be gradual because, as time goes on, new ways, heterodox ways of distributing culture will surface, and that's thanks to the free market. Really,
Yeah.
I stumble upon. I have that in my. I have that in my bookmarks, so I'll send that to you, Ben, because that might be of interest to you if you don't know them. But I finally found a publisher that makes it clear they're not woke.
Okay.
Like, we don't, we don't do into that stuff, and they're pretty
That's
big,
good.
right?
Well, that's good to hear. And I can tell you, for me, the funding, yeah, you're looking at it. I am the funding for my books.
but let's suppose, for instance, that you're a musician and you got your funding from New Music USA, the one
Yeah.
Then it's like, well, that's a problem, right? Because
Sure.
we're participating. If Newtown participate in the continuation of this woke infrastructure, what's the point of Newtown? But then again, if you're an independent musician and you spend 10,000 hours working on your album, that sort of offset, the $15,000 that you got from New Music USA.
Right.
But here's the kicker. Next time around on your next album, we're going to ask that you get your funding, at least a third of your funding, from heterodox money, right? Whatever the source. It could be private, it could be a foundation, it could be a corporation, whatever it is.
Right.
But whatever it is, you have to open the books, right? We have to know where the money comes from, right? And so that means that over time, what Newtown does is that over time, and I mean decade here, over time, it will shift cultural wealth, right? It will open up possibilities for heterodox money to fund culture, which doesn't have an opportunity now, right? So, and sort of, and not to mention sort of being a catalyst for, and I'm in touch with, I just said a minute ago, with a young adult novelist, and she's like, I'm just about to start my own publishing house. Because if no other will publish my work, I'll just start my own damn publishing house.
Right.
That will not be woke. That will welcome other young adult novelists that are not woke as well. You know what I mean? So again, the free market is sort of doing its thing, and it connects with Newtown because that publishing house can be certified Newtown itself.
Yeah.
And so everything that publishing house will release will be automatically certified Newtown, right?
All right.
In a period of time. Right. And
good.
so, right. So it's sort of it's an intricate web. I mean, the woke have their own intricate web of funding and distribution and production. And so the idea of Newtown and other efforts, right, will create our own intricate web of cultural production, distribution, and funding.
Right.
But the idea of Newtown is that, Ben Shapiro doing movies, that's what I call a bottom-up solution.
Yeah.
Right. But they're needed, right? It's tactical, right?
Yeah.
But the idea of Newtown is that it's strategic, right? It's from the top down. It looks at culture as a whole from the top down and says, we're going to split culture into two parts, right? So whatever you woke guys want to do on the other side of the fence, you go ahead. But on this side of the fence, we're going to have a party. We're going to have culture made by people who just want to do culture, who will probably take risks, while doing it, propose new ideas. It's going to be a fun party, right?
Yeah.
And we know that there are millions of consumers out there who just want to have access to that culture. And as soon as they get a whiff of one easy way to look for it, and I've done my research before, launching Newtown. The consumers are ready, guys.
Oh yeah.
If you talk to average Joe, it's like, hey, what if I tell you there's one simple way to look for non-woke culture? Really, how? And then I tell them about Newtown, and of course, the question, the first question is, how does it cost? Nothing.
Wow, very cool.
Nothing. No, nothing. It costs something for the artist to get certified, but for the consumer, it's nothing. there's no membership there's no membership Patreon or anything like that.
Right.
You just go about your business. You go in a bookstore, and if you see a book by Ben, boom, it's certified Newtown. There you go, buddy. Enjoy. That's all you have to do, right? So, as a consumer, that's all you have to worry about, right?
That's awesome, man.
And the consumers, if there are people who responded to Newtown when I sort of surveyed, because I surveyed, the consumers, the academics, the think tanks, the investors, right? I sort of reached out to all these kinds of people, and the consumers like, yeah, sure, no problem, because they're sick and tired of it.
Yeah.
And that's why the idea of Newtown came to me, so to speak, because I recognize in late 2020, I recognized the need for clarity, right? The need for, because people don't have time, right? And right. There's even it's been going on for a while now, but you go on torrent websites, and there's a new film and that's available as a torrent, and people now will just say, how woke is this thing? Yeah. So pirates who could, by the click of a button, download a film for free in a matter of seconds, would rather watch paint dry than watch a woke film.
Yeah.
Right? Because they asked the question, right? It's like, how woke is this thing? Right? So if the fringe, if the fringes of the consumer base is like that, right, then the rest will just follow. It's just a matter of time, right? And so there you go. There's the need. And I've seen it when I studied, Joe Rogan's channel on YouTube, Ben Shapiro's and Jordan Peterson. I've seen this time and time again, in the comment section. It's like, hey, what about culture? Why can't I have something that's easy for me to access and in all forms, right? In all type of statements and whatnot. And so this need for clarity is what popped out to me, right? And so sure, if Ben Shapiro wants to do something that's cool, and then go for it, but it's just going to reach a tiny portion of the population, right? Of the consumer base. But if all the consumers, all the heterodox consumers, have one easy thing to look for, then it suddenly makes things a lot easier. And by the way, there's a lot of moderate left that are in that consumer base. There's a lot of moderate lefts that are woke to an extent, and yet when they watch a film or they read a book, they want to have a cultural experience. They don't want to
be lectured, right?
Yeah, they don't want to be lectured on their on their politics, right? No. So there's a whole bunch of those out there as well. It's a lot of people. It's almost like 60% of the population, right?
Yeah.
And so that's, if the long march through the institutions got us where we are culturally and educational, on the educational side and on the political side as well, then we have to start our own long march of our own, right? Yeah. And hoping that a decade at least, it's going to have some sort of impact.
Right.
How long did it take for woke to? Now it seems like it's already sort of exploding, right? It's like the culmination of decades of preparation, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
Right? And now it's all there, right? That's why in my research for the second article, I was floored, guys. I'm part of the cultural industries, but I was floored. They literally have unlimited funding at this point.
Jeez.
And on mainstream, local, regional art, they have unlimited funding. Foundations, private foundations in America provide $80 billion a year to culture.
Jeez.
80 billions. That's just private foundations alone, right?
Right.
You don't count mainstream. You don't count the public money as well.
Right.
It's just staggering. It's staggering, right? And so it's and the people who work in these foundations, as I said earlier, they're part of advisory boards and here and there, and they're all connected, right? The woke takeover is pretty much complete.
Yeah.
So it's what we have now is sort of the culmination of what started by the idealists in the 60s and 70s that started invading academia and produced more people like this. And so if you want to address the situation. I don't know what education's going to do. That's their own problem. I don't know about education, but from a cultural perspective, at least there's something like that. There's something like Newtown. There's something like Shapiro doing its thing, and other people as well, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, maybe there are other people who are starting something, that's similar to Newtown right now. Who knows, and good for them, right? Newtown is not about, being the sole whatever.
Right.
It's about a practical thing that can do what it set out to achieve. It's just a matter of people hopping on board and getting to it,
That's awesome, man. Well, look, we should probably start wrapping this up soon, but thank you so much, man. This is we're really looking forward to seeing how Newtown evolves and grows.
Yeah, it's very exciting.
Yeah, and let's do this again sometime. Let's have you back on. It's it's one of the things we can talk for hours and hours about.
Yeah,
this, but, yeah, man. Thank you so much. Keep us posted.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity, guys. Yeah, that's really awesome. And I'll get back to you, Ben, with that name of that publishing house. Look into them.
Great, Philippe.
They're not major, but by the looks of it, they're making a dent now. They have a pretty big portfolio.
Sounds good.
So yeah. Maybe you know of them already, but who knows, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. All right, man. Thank you so much.
I just followed you on Twitter and Newtown, so
beautiful.
You can contact me there.
And you know what? If people want to get in touch, by the way, I'm just about to finish the real Newtown website, because right now it's sort of a page on another domain. So I've got the newtownculture.net website, so people can reach to me at contact@newtownculture.net or on Twitter @newtownculture. If they want to know more or get in touch, whatever reason they have, so yeah, that's where the action is going to be.
That's killer, man. Thank you so much. Great. And we'll do this again sometime, man. Best of luck to you.
Cheers. Have a good weekend, guys.
Yeah, you too.